Hello and welcome to The Public Good. This is Deja James from Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, which unites over 340 community organizations working to build a better Buffalo. We're delighted to join you every Tuesday morning at 11:30 a.m. on Power 96.5 FM and Mix 1080 AM. You can watch full video of every show on our YouTube page. Follow PPG Buffalo on Facebook and Instagram for clips and how to access video and full podcasts of our show. And of course, you can always get great information on our website, ppgbuffalo.org. Before I introduce our guests, I also want to highlight a way you as a listener can interact with us here at The Public Good. We want to hear your thoughts on how we can better our community. Email us at info@ppgbuffalo.org to let us know your ideas for change. We'd love to hear of community organizations you appreciate, initiatives that you believe deserve spotlight. And we also encourage commentary, questions, or feedback on current episodes. Reach out at info@ppgbuffalo.org and be sure to let us know where you're listening from and who you are. Now back to the show. This week, we are so lucky to be joined by two colleagues of mine that I've gotten really close with, actually. But we're joined by Sam White from Western New York Law Center, as well as Quinn Carroll from New York Civil Liberties Union. And we are here to talk about suspension rates in the Buffalo public school system. I think this is really maybe an under talked about thing in the community. I think parents who have children within the Buffalo public school system, definitely it's like top of mind, right? But I don't know if the community at large really knows a lot about the different issues that go on with youth. But it's important for our entire community to be aware of this because at the end of the day, these kids are the future of society. And so it's really important for us to talk about. But I just want to give a chance for our guests to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how they even got into kind of suspension advocacy. And we'll get into also what the issues have been with suspension as well. But I'll give you both a chance to just introduce yourselves really quickly.
Hi, everybody. I'm attorney Sam White. I'm with the Western New York Law Center. I helped to launch the School Discipline Project, and I'm the supervising attorney for it. We represent families that are going through suspensions. We also help with Committee on Special Education meetings. We do the hearings themselves. We do appeals to the board, the Commissioner of Education, Board of Regents for some of the charter schools. I got into community organizing by chance. I think that many of the organizers don't necessarily plan this as a career. I'm an attorney. I've been a public defender in city court. I did that for about 4 years. And the opportunity to shift gears and transition into education law was natural, to go from, trying to stop the flow at one end of the school to prison pipeline.
Yeah.
To the other and try and change the trajectories of kids' lives. It felt like I might have the opportunity to have a bigger impact. And so with the experience that I had in defending people in high-stakes situations, it was very natural for me to go and defend children and try and influence outcomes.
Absolutely. It sounds like also like you saw kind of the end of the pipeline and we're like, wait, the issue's actually way back there. Let me rewind a bit. So that's really interesting perspective too, especially coming from like a lawyer. I think it just shows the systemic, map of all of this. I think a lot of the times we feel like we want to get to have our children be the lawyer and be able to change society. But it's like, it actually starts with educators and like way before some of these other broader professions that are kind of maybe putting Band-Aids on things that could be resolved maybe even further back in the pipeline. So I just think that's a really interesting point that came up as you were talking. Sorry, but Quinn, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So hi, everybody. My name is Quinn Carroll. I'm a youth programs manager with the New York Civil Liberties Union. And my trajectory was a little weird. I actually started as a neuroscientist and a researcher.
Amazing. I didn't even know that.
I transitioned into sexual violence prevention work because working in academia, I saw so many students go through and not receive the resources that they wanted or needed. And I really saw systemic issues going on where these college students were impacted so early. And so I transitioned into being an educator for sexual violence prevention. So I worked in a few high schools in the Western New York area. And then I started working with the New York Civil Liberties Union as an organizer. And I started on the suspension project, and I realized that I was actually a victim of exclusionary discipline as a young child. And, I told it as a funny story until I realized, oh, actually, that was really wrong to have happen. Yeah. But I was in preschool and they kicked me out because there was a manifestation of, mental health issues going on. We see this happen all the time in BPS. We see this happen all the time with children who don't even know what they're doing is wrong. So that's why I'm particularly passionate about the project.
Absolutely. And for the audience, you mentioned a great term, but what is exclusionary discipline, just so that people are aware of what that means?
So exclusionary discipline is when a child is kicked out of school. Oftentimes we see that as suspensions or out-of-school suspensions and that kind of thing, where the student now is not receiving the education or the resources that they could have.
They're just being completely cut off as punishment.
Correct.
Yeah.
And this has such a big impact on our community because if you think about it, there are some children who get their breakfast and their lunch there, and if they stay late, they may catch dinner. And if they're put out of school for a week, 2 weeks or more, they may not have meals.
Right. Yeah. And that's why the city had made like the school lunch program where you could come even during the summertime and different things like that. I think a lot of people are aware of that. Food deserts, all of those things that we've talked about, I think, as a public for a long time. I think the other kind of risk that you have is we know that there's low literacy rates or other kind of educational issues. And so how are we then saying that the solution is for behavioral issues to then cut people off or cut children off from education? I think that's really counterintuitive. And I think that's another thing that this gets into. I forgot to mention that this is on the community agenda for Partnership for the Public Good. So I just wanted to mention that as well. Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, so I really want to just give thanks to Partnership for Public Good. The way that you guys organize so many different community groups so that we can try and make real change, a tangible change inside of 1 year in terms of a policy or a piece of legislation is so profound. It was an incredible experience to go through the PPG plank process and to have a church filled with leaders from organizations democratically voting on what it is, what the change they wanted to see would be, and for our plank, which we entitled Addressing Racial and Special Needs Disparities in Buffalo Public Schools by implementing NYSED recommendations, that's the New York State Education Department recommendations, we hope to see the elimination of suspensions pre-K through third grade. They shouldn't be suspending the babies.
Yep.
We want to see an elimination of suspensions longer than 20 days. When you suspend a kid longer than 20 days, you increase that child's chance to drop out. We want to eliminate suspensions for insubordination and other low-level subjective infractions because we see bias seep into the system with these kinds of suspensions. And lastly, if a kid needs to be put out of school on a suspension, they need to have access and instruction to their work. They need regular schoolwork. So these 4 points have the potential to reduce the total number of suspensions per year in the Buffalo Public School systems, which is the highest per capita suspender in the state of New York. It has the potential to produce better outcomes and provide better supports to our community, to our children, so that we can at least hold education as that pathway out of poverty.
Yeah.
When you suspend too much, you take that option away from so many.
Yeah.
Too many.
And, access to education, there's so many people in the past who have fought for our right for access to education. And so to then say a punishment is going to be we're taking that away, it's I just don't know how it makes sense to people who kind of are policymakers and things like that. I'm wondering, in you talking about getting rid of it for K through third, who are we really seeing most affected by the current policy of suspensions right now? What demographic of children really are suffering the most from exclusionary punishment?
Yeah. So I'll make a point about the K-3 first, and then I'll get into that.
Yeah.
There's a rhetoric going around that, sometimes suspensions are a positive thing because we want students to learn what they did was wrong. But students K-3 aren't going to learn what they did was wrong. They can't really understand it most of the time. They just know that they were kicked out of school. So that's why, this part
even
really
if you're
important.
older, I mean,
Yeah,
it's like,
right.
oh, well, school vacation, what I mean, or whatever. I don't.
You're not
how it's-
learning.
And if you're not actually having a discussion about the behavior or the offense or how is there really a resolution there?
Another important thing to understand is children in this age group are also at the beginning of the pipeline for diagnosis for special education needs.
Yeah.
And so some of these behavioral issues really are just flags for the school district to provide them with additional services.
Absolutely.
They need more services not to be put out of school.
Absolutely.
And they're learning how to read then.
Yeah.
And we're looking at the literacy rates in Buffalo Public Schools. Kids can't read on grade level.
Well, not if they're missing 20 to 30 days
Right.
of school.
Yeah.
I mean,
so those are the kids that need to be in school the most.
Yeah.
And, like I said, they don't know what they did was wrong.
and I think that even the offense itself, because it's eliminating suspensions, I think the most interesting part is for insubordination and low-level subjective infractions.
Right.
I think the other thing is it's not the kid had a fight in the playground or outside or waiting for the bus. Sometimes it's just the subjective, the teacher felt a student was being disrespectful,
Yes.
quote unquote, whatever that means,
Yeah.
right? And like Sam said, that's a huge opportunity for bias to come into play because a lot of the times, culturally, a lot of the teachers are not from the same areas or demographics as some of the students. And so the kind of subjective nature of respect or things like that are very vastly different, right?
Or the leeway that's given to one child over another.
Exactly. And that can cause, I mean, if I saw another kid getting treated differently and I'm getting treated differently, that could cause me to want to act out even more, right? And so it's about the environment that you're creating for children to be in. And I think there was something featured on the news with Buffalo Peacemakers a few weeks ago where there was an incident downtown. There was a little bit of a fight or something like that. And the kids were like, they didn't talk to any of us about why that actually happened, who was involved. And they actually suspended some of the kids who were trying to help the person who were just getting jumped at the time, right? And so there's no discussion that happens.
Yeah.
It's just, we're blanket, all of you get out, right? And how's that helping?
There's also a pattern of retaliation.
Yeah.
And students are brave enough to speak up and go on the news.
Yep.
There are subsequent suspensions that follow.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure it's really a huge risk for them. And I think even in that news segment, it was only one young lady who was speaking, but, the videos from the incident showed at least 20 to 30 kids there at the time, right?
Yeah. And that's the problem. There isn't a dialogue going on between students and teachers where students feel like they can share what happened and to be heard. And that's what suspensions do, right? They make people feel like this is no longer a trusted environment.
Now, what are these suspension hearings are supposed to be that you all are helping with legal representation for? What is that supposed to be? How could that maybe be reformed in a way to be something that could hear students out or have more of a discussion-based piece? I don't know what those hearings what their current function is, to be honest with you. I didn't even know they existed.
Sure. Well, Sam, do you want to talk a little bit about what a hearing is like? And then I can get into the hotline coalition that we have.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to give a phone number.
Yeah.
And we offer free representation for long-term suspension hearings. We can also help squash beef with a restorative circle. The phone number for our suspension hotline and our restorative justice hotline is 716-220-7081. Quinn's going to talk about that more in just a moment. But when you are suspending a student from school for more than 5 days, you are required to have a level of due process. And that right came from a Supreme Court case.
Okay.
And it's been reaffirmed in New York State Education Law 3214 and inside of Commissioner Rules and Regulations. Okay, New York State Commissioner of Education Rules and Regulations.
Yeah.
So what is that hearing supposed to look like? Well, if your child is put out of school and there's a 5-day short-term suspension, what's supposed to happen is you are supposed to be notified that there could potentially be a suspension. This notice should tell you that you have a right to talk to the principal during an informal principal conference, where you could try and come up with an alternative to the suspension. What we typically see is that they use form language saying that the children are a continuing danger to people, persons, or property. Pick any one of the three. And they immediately suspend without going through a more proper notification and discussion, where you have the opportunity to cross-examine witnesses who might have seen the incident and, work out an alternative or lesser punishment with the principal. We just don't see that often.
So they're just skipping that step at this point.
They are. Many of the families that I represent are not even getting a written notice for the out-of-school suspension.
And they're supposed to.
Yeah.
Just so that's clear.
Yeah.
Every suspension should get a written notice.
Okay.
Whether it's the 5 days or more. And it should be in the language that you speak. So say someone in the household speaks Spanish or Bengali or Karen, it should come in the language that the family speaks.
Yeah.
The children should not be in a position where they are acting as the interpreter for the school district. The school does have resources to use things like the language line for those purposes.
Right.
But we're not seeing that. There is, if it's going to be a longer suspension, a second notice should come, and it is a notice of a superintendent's hearing. Sometimes they'll call it a formal. Sometimes it'll be called a long-term suspension hearing. And it tells you typically that there's going to be a hearing that's held in City Hall. You're required to be there typically 30 minutes before the hearing. When you get there, you'll be asked to wait in a small waiting room. A hearing officer will come and get you. That notice also tells you the charge. You're supposed to be notified what it is that your child is accused of. We believe that families should also receive the disciplinary history record in this notification. They are not receiving that until moments before the hearing. These hearings are supposed to be bifurcated under the New York, under the Commissioner's Rules and Regulations for the Commissioner of Education. And what we see is that a hearing for an unrepresented family can run 15 to 30 minutes. Many times the family walks out of the hearing without knowing if their child has been deemed innocent or guilty. They are not allowed to return to school even though they don't have a decision, which is in violation of Education Law 3214. It can take days or weeks, and in some cases months, to get a written decision from the district. It's troubling.
I'm like boggled right now by everything you're saying. I just don't even know how this is happening.
Additionally, they are not providing a penalty phase for families to have input into how long the child should be suspended. So you walk out not knowing if your child is going to be found guilty or innocent, or how long your kid is suspended.
So in the meantime, they got suspended for 30 days and they're just serving the time anyway through this hearing process.
They may not know that they're suspended for 30 days.
But they can't go to school in the meantime.
Well, technically, after 5 days, they're allowed to return to school.
Okay. Are kids returning are they able to?
The school district is not telling families that they are able to return.
So they don't even know what to
do.
do. They have no idea what to do with their child in the meantime.
We've also seen that students who return to school to try to get their schoolwork and that kind of thing are turned away.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to be sent home with some like work packet or something like that.
No, they're entitled to 2 hours if they're in high school, 2 hours a day of instruction.
Right.
And what we actually see is a virtual computer link being opened, nobody having their cameras on. The teacher will take attendance in the first 15 minutes, say something like, if you have questions, ask me. This is somebody who isn't even on camera. You won't even hear anything for the rest. It'll just be silence on the web group chat. So there's no value or instruction coming out of that alternate instruction that's currently being provided. We're also seeing that that's only offered Monday through Thursday, where it's required to be offered Monday through Friday.
And at that point, if I'm the child, I've just checked out. Like, I'm not going to try harder. School's already hard enough. They kicked me out, probably for something unfair. I'm already upset about it. Why am I even bothering anymore, right? Nobody's hearing me. Nobody's listening to me. I just can only imagine how the actual young person feels in this kind of very confusing and convoluted process, if you can even call it an official process.
Right.
So I'm like, what can we do about this? How can we, this is asking for the elimination of K through third, but it sounds like even for 4th through 12 at that point, there's still a large issue here.
Yeah, and I can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So a majority of what we're seeing is that Black students are being suspended disproportionately compared to their white peers.
Yeah.
Students who are economically disadvantaged are also suspended at higher rates, and students with disabilities. And oftentimes, it's a manifestation of their disability as to why they're getting suspended.
Right.
But we're talking about 2.5 times the rate. Not just like 10% more.
Yeah.
We're talking 2.5 times the rate.
Yeah.
Black kids are being suspended more than, Caucasian children.
I think one of the statements you have written here is that Black students account for 40% of the BPS population, but they account for 60% of the suspension. So how are you only 40% of the population, but you're 60% of the...
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so Black students only account for 42% of BPS population as a whole, but account for over 60% of the short-term suspensions that we're seeing. So that's less than 5 days. And like Sam had mentioned before, we've been working with families and advocates on this issue for over a decade. I mean, I've only been working on it for a few years, but it's still a few years.
Yeah.
And it's a systemic problem. Like, this isn't one person who, is the cause of the problem. This is within almost every school within the district. We're seeing this bias with who is suspended. And Black students are the ones that are getting suspended for those low-level infractions mentioned. So like the disrespectful behavior and who decides what disrespectful behavior looks like, right?
And it's about...
And it goes back to that cultural issue that you brought up.
Yeah. And I think also like what disadvantages they're facing at home before they even come to school, right? Which is the other issue when we're talking about systemic things. It's beyond just the education, institution, the building that they're walking into, but where they're coming from. Do they have meals at home? Do they have a present parent? I come from a family that has, drug addiction, and within our family that has definitely caused issues in that kind of nuclear network that's supposed to be that support system for you. And a lot of other people are suffering from a lot of other things as well, absences, incarceration, other things like that.
Yeah.
So you can only imagine, but then you're coming into school with these issues. Maybe you have IDP needs, maybe you have other mental health needs. Do you think it's an issue of the school doesn't have, or the schools rather, don't have the capacity to actually address mental health and IDP properly?
I can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
So we've done interviews with teachers and social workers in the district to ask them that question. Like, what do they need to not suspend students?
Yeah.
And for one, they're saying they've never seen a suspension help a student. Point blank, period. A suspension has never helped a student. But they don't even have a process for mental health needs. I asked, if a student acts up in class, are they sent to the social worker? They said no. or there isn't like a clear route for that.
Yeah.
I think we need to invest in our students. I think we need to invest in these mental health needs that we're seeing in our community.
Absolutely.
Like all of the trauma that students are bringing into the schools, all of the things that you mentioned that are happening at home. And when you don't get the resources in school, no wonder students are acting out. I would too.
Right.
Because you're not being heard, you're not being listened to, and you're not getting what you need.
Yeah. So what other supports are you all giving to parents? I know you're helping with legal representation during the hearings, but I just want to give a chance, because we're coming to the end of the show, for you all to say kind of some of the other things outside of this direct advocacy that you're currently doing to try and fill the gaps that exist.
Yeah. So I actually run a student ambassadors program with the New York Civil Liberties Union. So I work with directly impacted students, on issues like suspension. So we do that. We've met with the district a number of times to talk about this because we do believe we all in community have a collective responsibility for this issue, because when students leave school, they're a part of the community, and education is a really important tool in things like getting out of poverty.
Of course.
And so we're working on that. Both Sam and I have worked to host Know Your Rights, so parents and students are aware of those hearings and, what a suspension entails, what their rights are.
Yeah.
Let me see what else.
In the last year, I've spoken to about 500 parents and children. It's, it's important to just keep sharing the information. If you go to WNYLC.com/schools, you'll find a whole bunch of resources that are available, as well as the hotline number. Let me give that one more time.
Yeah.
That is 716-220-7081. If you need help with a suspension, if you need a restorative justice conference, if you need help with a short-term suspension and dealing with the school, 716-220-7081. There's no charge.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think just knowing that you all are out there for a resource is awesome too, because I know personally families who have dealt with suspension issues and they don't think there's anything they can really do about it, right? And so doing these Know Your Rights training, I think, is really great. Supporting parents, I think a lot of the times people want to blame parents for this, right? And they're definitely under-resourced and have a lot of other issues that they have, just like the kids have systemic issues they're facing, so do their parents, right? Yeah. And so being able to be a supportive network for parents rather than just an accusatory one, I think is amazing as well. But I
do you mind if I make one more point?
Please.
Yeah. Just something that I wanted to highlight. This might get a little data, like heavy in the data, but I hope I can convey it in a proper way. So BPS has a data dashboard, and one of their goals, like one of Dr. Williams' top 5 goals, is to decrease suspensions, and that's one of our goals as well.
Yeah.
But the way that it's calculated on the data dashboard does not look at the whole picture. So they are only looking at enrollment, and so they are seeing that suspensions are going down. But we are looking at the daily average attendance.
Okay.
So we're looking at the students that are actually showing up to school, because we know that chronic absenteeism is
another issue.
Right. Yes. Kids that are already suspended are still being counted in that number.
Right.
And the percentage.
So it throws it off a little bit from the reality of what's happening day to day within the schools.
Yeah. So for example, if there are 100 students that are enrolled in a school, but only 80 are showing up, they're only looking at the 100 students. And so the suspension numbers would be different, of course, because the math isn't mathing.
Right.
But
oh my goodness.
I just want so I just want to highlight that as a way of, I want to make sure we have all the information that we deserve to have and know what is actually happening to the students in the schools. And looking at what is happening to the students who are showing up in schools and how many students are either have chronic absenteeism or are getting suspended. We need to look at the suspension numbers the right way.
Absolutely do. I thank you both. I'm sorry we're to the end of the show already. It's like we have these large systemic issues we want to talk to in under 30 minutes. It's really difficult to do. But Sam and Quinn both gave everyone really good resources. We'll make sure to link them as well virtually wherever you can get podcasts, and also on our YouTube page and our Facebook page and our website, because you are on a plank as well. So ppgbuffalo.org, you can get a lot more information there. This is Deja James with Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, uniting over 340 organizations working to build a better Buffalo. Thank you so much to you both for being here. It's The Public Good, Tuesdays at 11:30 a.m. on Power 96.5 FM and Mix 1080 a.m.